All right. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. This is my capstone project. Phantom Vision. Copyright 2023, Lone Wolf. Phantom Vision, it's a 3D action puzzle dark fantasy game in which the player takes on the role of a ghost, with their objective being to guide their descendants through a series of haunted catacombs in order to lift an ancient curse. The game switches the role between the player and the computer, as the player is the one acting as the in-game guide who has to navigate the main characters through the game. The computer is taking the place of the main characters, just so you know. The player must use their basic ghost powers to scout the area and skillfully guide the characters on how to navigate it through without talking or physically interacting with them. The player can attack any enemies, only the characters can. Should the characters die, then it's game over. I thought that designing this kind of game, it would be a real interesting and fun and unique to do, because it would be like a role reversal between the character and the player, and show the significance of in-game guidance and game design. So the game. So when designing this game, my main inspirations for an example is to follow from Luigi's Mansion, Ghost Whisperer, Brave, The Haunted Mansion, Tomb Raider, Stranger Things, and Beetlejuice. A movie, in case any of you haven't heard about it. And here's a mood. This here's a mood board for what to expect, like the look and feel of the game. Like you can see, there are lots of ghosts and skeletons. There's another skeletons, as well as some petrified stone statues, people, Celtic art, and some haunted castles. And there's a catacomb as well. Like there's a real heavy Celtic theme in this game, and lots of some dark fantasy and ghostly horror-y kind of scary stuff in here. This here's a concept art for the title of the game, its main logo. And it's real nice, like it's a ghostly portal, like it shows the ghostly dark kind of dark fantasy theme of the game. Like has like these kind of like there are some portals are present, like it kind of takes it into the other side, sort of. And here's a concept art for the characters, like Alex and Matt. They're the two main characters who are computer controlled. And this is when the player will be taking on the role of Princess Morrigan, but for most of the game, she's in ghost form, as you can see down below. This here, up here, is her true appearance in ghost. Well, but her color scheme will be more like the ghost form. Just to point that out. And the characters continue. Here are the enemies we're going to see. This here is Aron, the Celtic god of the otherworld, who's the main antagonist of the game, like the final villain who's revealed. And right here is Lunar. Lunar, it's one of the bosses, like for the first level. I didn't color him because, I would have colored him because I wasn't really sure if I was going to ever include him, which I'll get to later. And here's the concept art for the environment items. Like right here, this is where the entrance to this here is where you find the entrance to levels. It's like some place in the castle, it goes deep down. Like these doors are like entrances to the different dungeons or levels that you play in. And right here, this is a concept art of like the first dungeon by what I'm hoping to achieve. What I'm hoping I want the first dungeon to look like. And here, and right here are the major items in the game. Like, this is the Harp of Thorns, a symbol of like the main characters and the player's clan. And it's a cross between the Celtic Tree of Life and Celtic Harp. It symbolizes their royalty and their connection to the other world. And in the Harp of Thorns, there are 5 holes. In those 5 holes go 5 gems. They're the main key, the main key to the objective of the game. Like, you have to go through the dungeons and and collect the gems in order to place them back into Harp of Thorns in order to break the curse. They're a source of their power. And the Spirit Crux and the Shield of Seamus, they're the 2 main weapons used by the main characters. Like, the Spirit Crux is wielded by Alex. It's a cross between a claymore and a longsword. It's used for capturing it's used to harm or capture ghosts. And it utilizes the power of the boss ghosts. Like, once you capture, like, it can capture the bosses inside the sword, and like, for each boss that the main character catches, they can use their powers for themselves throughout their quest. And right here is the Shield of Seamus. Like, you can see, it's got the family crest emblazoned on it. And it illuminates its main purpose is to illuminate a ray of light to banish ghosts or reflect an attack back with increased damage. It's quite useful against long range enemies. All right, so for the core mechanics, the main focus of the gameplay is for the player to serve as an in-game guide for the computer who takes on the role of the main characters, as I said before. So, like, their ghostly powers include telekinesis, intangibility, flight, door unlocking, teleportation, healing, light manipulation, and thermokinesis. The player uses their ghost powers together with their intuition and elements in the environment in order to help the main characters navigate through the game and solve the puzzles within it. Like, for example, they use telekinesis to move objects to the main character's advantage, as you can see, where they could write cryptic messages on the wall. Or they use light to guide them, or use temperature to ensure they're going in the right direction. For example, like you want to signify that they're getting warmer or closer to where they're going. And then you make the surrounding atmosphere around them warmer to signify that they keep going that way. Or if they're about to walk into danger or somewhere you don't want them to be, like, you make the area immediately cold to repel them away from danger. And so, like, the game loop, so basic game loop, first the game begins with the movie showing story behind the game, then the gameplay occurs. So the players enter a dungeon where they fight enemies and solve puzzles. And there are 3 puzzles in a level. And at the end of the level, they engage in a boss fight. Yeah. And the player at the end of the level, once they defeat the boss, they go to collect the gem. And as they do, another movie is shown, revealing hidden details in regards to the content previous movies. After that, after the movie is done, like the player collects the gem and then they return back to the hub, like where the entrances to the dungeons were, and they prepare to go into the next level to continue. And for the hook, like that's what. Awakening from centuries-long rest, you find your entire castle in the land of deserted due to the ancient curse we claim with all. When you find your descendants who boss on face to face with the very same enchantment, you must help them find the courage and wits to brave the dungeons of their castle and terrors within. Finally, reverse the curse and be at peace. It's real nice, awesome. I would have made it more creative, like, but more creative and more awesome, more descriptive, but like, I don't really have the time or the space to like, yeah, like think of something more awesome or more cool. All right, scope and the weekly goals for week 1 to 3, like. I did a revision or completion of the design doc as well as the deciding of official goals and final MVP. What I'm trying to do is I'm mostly trying to find external help at like at least 4, I need like at least 4 people. Of course, I made some good progress with that. And week 4 to 6, I need to do a further design of major game assets, MCs, weapons, enemies, environments, like creating the models for them. We're designing them. Or like having the levels planned out, and do a research on gameplay, AI, machine learning, VR puzzles, Celtic art, player guidance, those mechanics which really define the game, see how difficult they'll be to implement, and decide when to start and like how long I should be working on it. And then lay out a game design with the tutorial and first level planned out. For week 7 to 12, further research concerning the game mechanics must be performed. And then we do a final revision of the goals and MVP concerning the scope and the progress made. And then we do a design of the game level and cutscenes, as well as decision of future plans for the project. And for week 13-7, plan for next steps for the spring semester and address any final changes and/or concerns. All right, for the team members, there's me, the production manager, as art, audio, narrative, and UI. And over the weekend, I met Zach Thang. He's a good writer and he has a bit of knowledge in AI. He provided me with he's a really great creative writer, and he also provided me an awesome resource for AI, which would be a real big help. And Stan McKenzie, he's currently one of the advisors for the project. And I hope any of you professors would join, 2 more of you would like to join as advisors, and that'd be awesome. So the design goals of this game were to create an epic sense of mystery, danger, adventure, and tragedy. Experience meant for all ages to partake and immerse themselves in, rated E for everyone. And I also want to make use of some classical awesome ghost powers, not without directly conversing or physically interacting with the MCs to guide them through the puzzles which compose the game. Central characters also have personalities which conflict with each other, but are what drive them further along their journey. And they also gain some hidden abilities which they never knew about in order to use to their advantage throughout this quest. I also want to use the 3D art and animation during gameplay and cutscenes to have the player be caught more in the atmosphere of the game. 2D animation will be used for the cutscenes and prologue movie to give it more of a fantasy-like appearance to the backstory, almost make it almost like a fairy tale, but like in the prologues and movies, there's like a fantasy, it's like a fairy tale, but in real life, it's more dark and like serious and danger and action filled, like to give, yeah. To stick with the dark fantasy theme of the whole game. The end goal, a game with a tutorial and if possible, one level, all of which shows the main gameplay intended for the game. The main focus, yes, being the role reversal between the player and the computer, with the player as the in-game guide and the computer as the main characters playing the game. The cutscene and prologue films will be included should the scope allow it. All right, for skills and roles required, I already have like an expert writer. All I need left is like a 3D and 2D artist and animator, an AI specialist, and possibly a coding specialist. That would be nice. That would be nice. Feels great. Well, for challenges, like for now, there are only 2 members, me and Zach. We're expected to fill all the roles required, some of which we aren't as proficient in. Some external help will be needed. We have to figure out where to go, catching them up to speed and giving them updates. And for scoping, we have to ensure all the workload can be managed by 2 in the time allotted. And well, even if like, or even still, like, the only thing we have to worry about is if it'll be good compared to everyone else's, because we're like the smallest capstone team. For mechanics, we have to also figure out the difficulty of implementing the main mechanics and how long it will take to do so. So it's mostly like 3 challenges so far, and I'm pretty sure we can overcome it all. All right, any questions? Great.
We can keep going. We have a couple minutes for questions. Let's make sure there aren't any
Yeah.
faculty ones. Hold on. Faculty get first dibs.
Oh, it's our- Yeah.
Do we go in seniority or?
You just rank over all of them.
I do?
Faculty rank over students.
all.
They get to talk to each other other times. Eric, go.
So it sounds really interesting. I like the idea of not being in control of the person actually doing the actions. But one thing I'd be concerned about is it seems like in the tone you're going for, that you're looking for more of like a tense, not horror, but like a tense kind of suspense type scenario. What I could imagine, I'm almost envisioning of being a professor or an IT specialist that is trying to get someone to do something and they just can't. So like figuring out how to prevent it from swerving into like being humorous or funny, of like when you're trying to get the character to go to that door and instead they go somewhere else. Like, no, just go to the door. I highlighted it, I haunted it, I wrote on the door, enter here. I see like that being an issue of how you, if your goal is to head down the more serious tone, how do you prevent the play from being taken as kind of a more satire experience? But I like the general idea. Like I like being able to not control who actually is driving the action and trying to help them along.
Yeah, like. Yeah, that's gonna be quite difficult to figure out, but like.
Keep going. We're short on time, so I want to let the other teams set up, but you keep talking. And Sean has a question in Zoom too.
Oh, yeah, so yeah, that's something I'm planning to figure out. That's why like I need an AI specialist, like that's why I'm looking for. I went to the AI club, like that's where I found Zach, like, and I found some people who are interested and it gave me some nice advice.
Yeah,
But I'm hoping someone can like, officially join me as an AI specialist.
that's definitely good to hear of like that's going to be.
I also went to semester hackathon and pitched this very same game. Hopefully I can find some others to help me to join as well. All right, anyone else?
All right.
David?
We're very short on time. I think let's let Sean ask in Zoom because other people here can maybe talk to Ike during the break.
I could also send you.
Okay. Sean, Let me flip the switch and make sure we can hear you. Go ahead, Sean.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I do think that the idea is pretty interesting and innovative. The concern that I have is that there's a lot of like ground to break here. There's a lot of different things going on. And kind of one of the things that got me concerned was you listed out this whole big list of abilities, right? And every one of those things is going to have to be coded and implemented and tested and everything. And you've got one other person helping. So I'm still concerned about the scope on this. So you might want to consider how much you can scale back to what you would be able to do as a lone person, just in case. But I do think that it does sound interesting. Like Eric said, I think there's some cool stuff going on here. But I guess less of a question and more of just a comment of consider that scope. And what you could do as one person rather than, things are going to happen and trying to find other people to help with it. So
Yeah, figured. Yeah, I'm thinking at least I could get the tutorial with some action, just so I can really get the main focus and point across, so that way I can have properly expand upon it. And tweak it as followed, so that way, hopefully I can set up for success in the future, even after
Yeah.
graduation.
All right.
okay, yeah, just don't be afraid to start small.
All right, thank you. I don't know if you're cult of potato or cult of potato E. Am I supposed to?
Call the potato E.
I'm not, you are supposed to say the E.
You
Okay.
can say whatever.
Games?
Yeah.
Let me hide this new stuff for you.
Actually, I meant to grab my phone to get the plug and fish.
Is it the same one on paper?
Wait, what? No,
it's,
I'm just gonna pull up the speaker notes, like on the.
You're actually getting it.
All right, hello. Welcome. We are channel. We are Cult of Potatoey, and we are pitching Channel Getaway. And so I'd like to first introduce the Channel Getaways organizers. I'm Miles Michelle, and I'll be handling level and narrative design. We have Miranda, our tech artist, Elvis, our 3D modeler and 3D artist, and then Elvis. Wait, did I say Ottman? Our sorry, my bad. Ottman, our 3D modeler, and then Elvis, our gameplay producer and production and coder. All right. So now with that introduction out of the way, give a quick overview. So picture this. The year is 1986, and a distressed working person on the verge of mental collapse from work and home responsibility responsibilities. Their mental state is so deteriorated that they find themselves infatuated with the monochrome 50 style advertisement of Channel Getaway selling paradise. Paradise promises escape, bliss, and even salvation. All in the form of beach vacation. Their infatuation finds themselves transported to paradise for days upon end. Upon arrival, the character is immediately granted reality-bending powers to shape the beautiful and chaotic world and cosmos to their whim. You take the first-person perspective control of the player to carry out the use of this power and to fully see what paradise has to offer. It's all a dream. It's such a dream, devoid of the stress and monotony and hardships that keep piling up in the real world. But can paradise truly last forever? What I just mentioned, in addition to what's on screen, are some of our design and development goals we'd like to dive into. And here's our prototype cell sheet done by our external artist, Katie. So what will you actually be able to do in Paradise as a player? So to match some of our design pillars, we've settled on a core mechanic called Control Paradise. With this mechanic, you will quite literally be able to turn reality, much like an axle in a wheel. The gameplay flow of this mechanic is to find instances of environmental puzzles where you could use Control Paradise, and then to use reasoning and our physics to turn reality to solve the puzzles. High-level applications of this mechanic include balancing weights, setting the correct orientation of cogs, transferring items, and so on. And then some later uses of this mechanic involve sort of changing the mechanisms of how you operate them, such as up there where you control its color, so it works as intended. While this mechanic is a bit simple, the spectacle of it is what really is going to make it engaging. For instance, one of our planned puzzle instances of this puzzle, it has you rearranging star constellations to the shape of a child NPC's favorite animal. Overall, we want this mechanic to evoke feelings of larger than life while not making it overly complicated. And also, objects in which you will use Control Paradise will be exempt from the monochrome shader that we have in play. And so to better illustrate this mechanic, to better illustrate Control Paradise, we are comparing and researching games like The Witness and Uncharted 4. These games both have like environmental puzzle solving that's very much integrated into the structural and natural environment of each game. Both of these types of puzzles aren't usually the most complicated in control or even like concepts, but the spectacle and sort of tie-ins to the narrative and aesthetics are what really sells these puzzles and make them engaging. So for a quick scope of the game, we divided the game into a 3-act structure. Each act will consist of a scene in Paradise and a scene in real life. In Paradise, you will, in each instance of Paradise, you will interact with our spirit NPCs, use have at least one instance of Control Paradise, the puzzle environmental puzzle solving mechanic, and just generally explore the larger than life scenarios. Real life will be almost like a slap to the face and feel so much worse in comparison to this Paradise. And real life, the gameplay will mostly consist of you just observing how wrong things are going because of your time spending in Paradise. And so for a quick overview, the first scene of Act 1 is our introduction to Paradise and sort of onboarding of the mechanics of like Control Paradise and such. The next one is quite literally a slap in the face with reality. And you learn sort of the decrepit and deteriorated state you find yourself in. Next one is more of a look at Paradise, but you get you sort of see some nefarious cracks showing of this sort of reality. And then the next act in the second scene is the full consequence of your time spending in Paradise, where your spouse actually leaves you. And then our final scene and final instance of Paradise, at the end of it, you'll be given the offer to stay in Paradise, but at the price of your soul, or to quite literally wake up and face the reality of your problems. And we believe this sort of 3-act structure will provide enough sort of gameplay and narrative to sort of build meaning with those sort of design goals. Also, the sort of level of Paradise and the level of real life will be the same structurally, but the props and sort of scenarios and sort of differences in dialogue and interactions will be different. And also just to better show that help illustrate some of the environmental research and decisions we're going for. We're looking at natural environments like Hawaii and California. Both of these locations feature a vast array of sort of environmental structures such as coves, cliff sides, palm, natural pools, et cetera, et cetera. We're also examining sort of beach resorts. We're also looking at beach resorts mostly because while this is paradise, it's still an advertisement. So there's going to be a level of advertised tackiness to it, such as tiki bars and beach chairs and all that fun stuff. And lastly, we're looking at some other depictions of natural paradises, such as Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, to give that game that sort of larger than life feeling and beautiful chaos angle. And then, so with our sort of narrative mood board, I want to talk a little bit more about sort of the role that spirits play. These will be your primary method of dialogue and storytelling. The role that each of them play, some of them might be other buyers of paradise and are really happy with their decision to sort of give away their soul, while others express extreme regret. In addition, some of the organizers of paradise who sort of set you up on this whole thing will take the form of spirits. And overall, the sort of the design of spirits will be pretty similar, so it's a little hard to sort of tell who's trying to scam you or sell you something and who's being genuine. And sort of similar to the puzzle solving, the narrative important objects will be exempt from the monochrome shader. And yeah, just to further illustrate, very decrepit, very stressful real life scene. And sort of, and also, lastly, just to talk a bit about the game's decision of staying or leaving in paradise with the price of your soul. We don't really want to reward or punish players for feeling like they need to pick one side or another. Some might resonate with the sort of need for escapism that comes with media, and others might like sort of greatly value the sort of breaks in commercial, commercial consumeristic media. We ultimately want this decision to be 50-50, but let personal context and evaluation to make their final decision. So this is our current progress on the CRT shader. It's definitely pretty early on. I think it might even be a little hard to see with the lights on.
You can turn more of them on.
Yeah.
It shows up even worse than I expected to.
Yeah, I mean,
There we go.
yeah, they're more designed for.
It works much better live.
Anyway, these are still like pretty in progress, but we're still happy with the general direction of them. And sort of on that note, with sort of our modeling approach, we're going for less polygon and less sort of realistic in detail, mostly just because a lot of the finer details don't really show up as well under the shader. It also just allows us to bring out the produce the assets a bit quicker for the two environments. And just so for a quick sort of summary of what we're looking for community outreach, we're looking to make sure our shaders are distinct as possible while not really hampering performance or visual clarity. Second, environmental puzzle solving to help reach that middle ground between engaging and larger than life. And lastly, we definitely want to make sure with sort of our examination of media is impactful and gets players to really sort of evaluating their own stance on what they witness. So some risk, obviously scope is a huge one. We've already spent research is already proving to take a ton of time alone for this project. And so while we are sort of passionate about the 3X structure, we are willing to cut at least one of the acts just to make sure we have all our scope, so we don't get burnt out by the end of the semester, and overwork ourselves. Our second biggest risk is just sort of general confusion. We've sort of adopted our process to favor sort of in-person, face-to-face meetings because of this. Because if we're sort of confused of what the team is talking about, the places is going to be confused, and it's not going to be fun. And then lastly, just sort of in regards, we definitely know that some of our design and choices are a bit risky, such as the CRT shader and sort of environmental puzzle solving. We're a little afraid of how playtesters will sort of perceive these sort of design decisions, and that if like too much gameplay clarity is lost because of them. And because of that, we are also willing to sort of dial back some of our stronger, more ambitious choices for the sake of gameplay clarity, especially if like playtesters time and time again are just not really latching on with some of our decisions. All right, thank you. Any questions? Yep. Any professor questions?
Let me get.
Yeah, also Zoom.
I guess I want, what happens outside of Paradise?
Oh, so that is our real life scenes. These will ultimately be like pretty lower interactivity gameplay. It's quite literally you just sort of sit there on your couch and sort of observe your environments going to crap for this safe words. This is also where you get some sort of context clues of your sort of the consequences of spending a lot of time in Paradise with sort of your spouse leaving you as a result.
So like, are you interacting with it, or are you just like observing like a dialogue that's
no dialogue. You are mostly observing environmental changes and storytelling.
Gotcha.
Erica?
So I dropped a reference in your Discord for you to this weird
Thank you.
sci-fi TV show that I
Yeah.
watched over the summer. The Upload.
Oh, yeah.
I loved it. Anyway, you can go look.
Yeah.
But I guess it goes under risks. The other thing I'm concerned about is the portrayal of mental health and what this is going to say and convey. And I think you have to do a lot of research.
Yes.
And
definitely.
I am talk to Professor Simpkins also, and
Yes.
I'm glad it's recorded.
Yes, definitely.
Because there are some red flags in here that I think he can articulate
Okay. Yeah.
better than me, or we can talk offline.
Yeah.
I think if you do it well, it's really neat.
Yeah.
If you don't do it well, it could be dangerous.
Yeah.
Along those lines, you might check out, and I have no idea how to, how do you say this word?
I don't know if I'm gonna say it.
Is it Molly Industria? Sure. So there's a game called Every Day the Same Dream. Which is kind of the inverse of what you guys are talking about. So it might be something that you guys look into that can provide you with some inspiration.
Okay. You mind writing that down actually?
No, I won't write it.
Oh no.
You don't know faculty points.
Okay, I can.
Yeah.
He's interested in.
Yeah.
If y'all don't know Nick Lalone, he's one of our new faculty.
Awesome.
But Molly Industria Games, they kind of have retired recently, but they are a game company that tries to take kind of mundane ideas, and so real life, right? And put it on its head. So in this game, every day the same dream, you wake up, you get dressed, you commute, go to the office. At one point or another, you choose not to do that. And then it's like, you could have done this day one, you've decided not to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I would also just off of game references, look at Spec Ops: The Line, of how it deals with the assumptions that the player has, and then like what, like it's a great game. Definitely play it if you haven't already. Let's say you might have played it. But Spec Ops: The Line is really good of messing with the players' assumptions and kind of the ramifications of their actions.
Is that the game where you sort of go back in the war zone after you?
It's set in
It's PTSD, the game.
Yeah, I
yeah, it's
gotcha.
and like there's so like extra credits did a really good if you don't want to play the whole game. Extra credits did a really great
Okay.
series on it. But I also recommend it. It's a great game.
Okay, definitely check that out.
All right, we're technically in our break.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Is this supposed to be a depressing game?
Yeah, that's kind of like,
My worry, I think it's a worry you should take into account is that one, I'm worried monochrome is boring. As thematic and interesting as it is, but if it's boring and depressing, like that's a hard game to make. A game that maybe should be made, but I think it's added to the risks that it's difficult.
I
to get that
wrote
right.
down a game on here called Cave Evil, which is a board game.
Cave Evil.
It uses one color,
Gotcha.
so it can provide you with some inspiration, but it's also a death metal game.
Yeah.
so.
And also just like not everything is going to be in monochrome, especially like narrative important and sort of gameplay objects, interactions. sort of.
I just think it requires art to get it right. And
Yes.
which I'm sure you got, but
Mhm.
you'll have to apply.
Are we on break or?
yeah, let's let folks take a break, but
Sorry.
there are people with questions and you can always just go talk to your
Yes.
classmates.
Looks like, seems like.
You just.
He understands, but I'm holding down.
This is you now, right? You keep,
You say.
You don't
down
know.
or holding down?
forget it, my head down.
Did you know it already or should I?
I was gonna say, I.
No, that's, I knew it's
Put my
something.
feet up. Your notes?
I don't need them.
This is the blue is next and. Huh? Purple Walker.
Cool. Hello, everyone. We are 5 Sheets to the Wind, not currently, but we are 5 Sheets to the Wind. And our game is Libertatia. Libertatia is a construction management and simulation game where you assume the role of a pirate admiral in the golden age of piracy. Guide your crew through the construction of your outpost and the exploration of the open seas to find new settlements. At these new settlements, you will participate in small-scale land combat simulations with your crew to gather new resources and progress that way. By managing your crew's strengths and resources, you'll progress towards dominating the seas. That is, if you can best other pirates, colonialists, skeleton crews, and legendary sea monsters.
So, as Kyle stated, the focus is going to be on building your outpost, exploring the seas, and fighting other settlements, pirate crews, and so on. And so to do that, gameplay is split up amongst 3 key phases. We have the outpost phase, the exploration phase, and the combat phase, with the overarching goal of the whole game to upgrade your settlement as best you can, to dominate and keep your chance of success in the exploration and combat phase as high as possible. And all 3 of these phases will have different styles of gameplay and different feels, but will be linked together through elements that link key mechanics. So first off, the outpost phase. The key mechanics here will be building and upgrading structures on the outpost, managing your resources while you're there, and managing the balance of your crew members for exploration and combat, so you can strategize and prepare. We want this phase of gameplay to feel casual and relaxing. There's no timer set here. The player should feel like if they're taking a breath, they can take their time, prepare and strategize as they need to, so that when they go out, they feel as prepared as they can for whatever might come their way. In terms of UI, we will have an interface for building structures, which will be a grid-based system. Think things like Clash of Clans. We'll have an interface for purchasing new structures or upgrading current structures, as well as an interface for looking at information of structures that are producing resources. And the goal for this specific phase is, of course, to maximize the levels of the buildings you have, get new buildings, enhance, and as well build structures that can enhance your crew and tools for exploration. Once you are done with the outpost phase, you shift towards the exploration phase. Now, this is the phase that players will probably spend the least amount of time in and is the simplest, because the main thing it really just focuses on is going from your outpost and finding an island to plunder and attack. And so it'll have a simple map interface where players can pick an island. Depending on its distance, it'll eat up a certain amount of resources, since you need to be prepared for longer trips. The feel should be, simple, obvious, straightforward, right? You want to know where you're going, you click on where you're going and you go. As for the UI, you can simply click on the islands, and if you've already visited an island, there will be some information displayed detailing things like how much of a certain resource are left, or what type of enemies you encountered there. That way, if you want to revisit it, you can look at information and remember how you need to strategize to come back to that island. And the goal here is pretty simple. Select an island, survey enemy territory that you've already been to, so that you're best prepared for it. The last phase is the combat phase, where once you get to an island, you will face enemy settlers, pirates, skeleton crews, and such in combat. This will take on a more active style of gameplay. Think games like StarCraft, where you are managing your crew. You can be on an individual level or in groups. This should feel tense and chaotic. The player is actively engaged in what they are doing. They aren't sitting back and watching. They're making sure they know what all their groups are doing at what times, how they're being offensive, how they're being defensive, how they're focusing on gathering resources or prioritizing gathering resources. The UI, again, will be similar in nature to games like StarCraft, where the focus is on giving you information on your troops and where you're moving them to. And the goal here, as well, is pretty simple. Conquer the enemy settlement and gather as many resources from the settlement as you can. So to talk about what makes our game stand out, I'm going to make a comparison to a similar game in the genre, which is Fallout Shelter. And now it's going to seem like I'm kind of bashing it with these points. And I want to make clear that it's not about bashing games like Fallout Shelter. It's about highlighting the difference wherein the way mechanics and elements are handled within games like Fallout Shelter work because they are designed for a specific platform and a specific audience. And our game aims to reach a different platform and a different audience. And so what makes our game stand out is the way we shift from how these mechanics are handled. So for example, in a lot of these casual mobile games, real time is a big element for anything you do, right? Gathering resources, building things, performing actions. There's an element of, I'm going to start this thing and I'm going to leave it for 3 hours and come back later. And we want a game that players can play at their own pace. If they want to play it for a long time, they can. If they want to play it for a short amount of time, they can. And so instead of incorporating real-time elements, we have a point-based system where, depending on how far players travel during their exploration phase, they build up action points, as we're currently calling them, that then can be used towards performing actions on the settlement, gathering resources. And that way, players can loop through the game as many times as they want in a sitting, or as few times as they want, without feeling like they are limited by the game and real world time. The next thing is, with these casual games, they tend to focus on mainly the outpost building to keep the gameplay simple and to keep the players from shifting focus a lot. And so things like exploration and combat are very uninvolved. In the case of Fallout Shelter, it's pretty much just you send a guy out and you'll just see a text box that says they encountered this thing. This thing came up. They found this. And you can maybe hit a button to get a crit attack. We want players to feel involved in the entire process through the gameplay loop in our game. And that's why we've put an emphasis on exploration and combat in terms of having them be engaging parts of gameplay rather than just focusing on building your settlement and managing that. And lastly, in games like these, because the focus is on the outpost, when it comes to managing, in case Fallout Shelter, they call them dwellers, right? We would call them crew members. When it comes to Fallout Shelter, dweller management is on an individual level, right? Each individual person has a happiness, a hunger, a so-and-so. And that can be very complex. And so this was actually one of the areas where we wanted to pull away from complexity and simplify more. And instead, we have a system that, instead of you managing individual crew members' needs, you are managing the needs of the crew as a whole through a system we call the loyalty meter. the crews need food to eat. If you are not making enough food for your crew, people aren't going to feel good. And depending on how you manage your resources in your combat, the loyalty meter will be impacted, and will affect how crews stick out with you when times are tough. Will they stay with you and help you be successful? Will they leave you to suffer? And so through the use of the action points, the loyalty meter, and resources in general, those are the key three things that link our three phases of gameplay together to form a strong cohesion.
Cool. So our scope, because at the grand level, this seems like a lot to take on. What we're really looking to do at the base level is to get one cohesive game loop feel. Really just looping through it once or twice to really get the player to feel the progression in their outpost, which we're kind of looking at Northgard for our art style and the way that we're going to be placing and building these things. We want to make sure that when people go out to explore, and we're using Fallout as our scope for this, basically just point, click, go to an area, uncover the map as you're exploring it, rather than going more in depth, just to keep it simple. Because otherwise, if we put equal weight into all three of these areas, it'll end up feeling, or we'll end up getting way out of scope. And our combat sim. So as we get through this entire loop, we want to go through it twice with 2 islands, ideally for our project. Just to show that you're progressing in your outpost and that you're progressing in your combat, and that there's different types of combat, or different types of islands, really. With that kind of comes with the different types of exploration that you'll see as you're going out and finding these islands and getting familiar with it. The main challenges we have is that we have no art team. So we have an external team now. We're working with 4 or 5 other people, 4 artists on audio. And with that comes with the challenge of creating cohesive art and aesthetic. And along with that, it comes with creating the cohesive phases that we're talking about and making them blend together in a way that's actually meaningful. We need to create clear and intuitive UI so that players know what's going on in each of these phases, which also comes with effective onboarding. And then again, the idea is that we paint a clearer picture of what our experience is intended to be at the end of this. To wrap it up, basically our crew here, we've got Adam Fan on game design, me, Kyle James, I'm working on production and design and development. Sajal is working on game design and development, and we have Winston and Adam Zaffron working on game development. Unit.
What's the button for the speaker?
What are you looking for? Either you go or I go.
I'm going.
I'll go.
Okay.
I've got one too.
And I'm in front.
All right. I'm in the back. I need the handicap.
Go ahead.
So I think my big concerning question is, you said you didn't want to like you have the 3 systems that you didn't want to prioritize all of them equally. So that means one of those has to be your core.
Yeah.
Which is it?
It is the construction management.
Interesting. Okay. That's not what I would have thought it was. But okay. That's like, I think my concern was, for you're making 3 games, because I would focus entirely on that, and the other 2 should be not. You should be able to implement the base building without having those at all.
Right.
Okay. Go ahead.
So just some clarification on some stuff. This is pirate based.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm interested to know why you picked Fallout Shelter as a comparison when it compares much better to things like Age of Empires and Northgard and everything else. I mean, when you're talking about base building, I mean, Fallout Shelter is like completely different genre, and it really has nothing to do with it.
Right. So we talked about, or we used Fallout Shelter as our comparison largely as the large scale, which is the idea of you're building something, you're going out and exploring and doing things to raid, do whatever that you need to do. In terms of the construction management, we're looking more at Northgard, which is like that top-down isometric 3D view of placing the buildings.
I mean, that's pretty much any kind of real-time strategy is going to have that view. My next question is what you are talking about something that I'm a big real-time strategy fan. And I played a lot of them. I played all of the Age of Empires. I've played, a ton of these things. I mean, one of the biggest like draws to that is the real time. And one of the things that concerns me is you guys are talking about not doing real time.
So
what does that turn it into then?
yeah, I think in terms of how we communicated, we probably misconstrued it a little bit. It's not entirely real time and it's not entirely not real time. So you're gonna have the elements of the construction management that are more laid back, not real time, like things aren't getting done there. The exploration is somewhere in the middle, it's real time, but you're going someplace. And then when you get to the combat phase, it is real time combat, like styles like Northgard.
Okay.
Yep.
When we were specifying the difference between real time and not, it was more so in the settlement in the outpost phase, because when handling gameplay types like that, their idea of real time, comparing it to an RTS, the idea of real time in an RTS is more that you are actively doing things and the gameplay is being affected in moment to moment, as opposed to here in the outpost, right? It's like, oh, do this thing. Now you got to go wait 5 minutes. You can't really do much in that 5 minutes. And so that's what we
real-time
meant.
strategy, though, that 5 minutes you're doing other things. I mean, it's a layering of things you're doing. It's not just, okay, I'm going to build this building and sit down and wait. While I'm building this building, I'm sending somebody out to hunt, to bring in more resources. While they're out hunting, I'm, patrolling to find other enemy. I mean, so there's like with real-time strategy, there's layers of things you're doing at the same time. You're never, when I play a real-time strategy game, I am never waiting for anything. I mean, that's part of the joy of it, is you're having to juggle so many different things at the same time that it's, when you say that you're waiting for a building to be built, it sounds like it's like, okay, well, this is a place where I just stop playing. And that's not how it is in real-time strategy.
If I may interject.
Sure.
Basically, it's like taking the element of like the juggling and simplifying it a little bit.
Okay.
So when you're constructing your building in the outpost, you are devoting like a person to go build that, and you have to send people out to go get the action points that will complete that time, which is like the idea of spending the time. So the juggling is making sure that you're going to have enough resources as you go out to explore, to survive, and by the time your crew comes back, that your crew is still in a standing position, basically.
So I guess I have follow-up questions to that, because while I was sitting here, I wasn't thinking about real-time strategy. I was thinking about the app versions of a lot of the real-time strategy games. So like Romance of the Three Kingdoms is probably the last one that I played, and it uses a lot of the mechanics you guys have already talked about. You need to have enough resources to be able to tell somebody to build something. That building something takes time, and you're having to not really do anything while you're working on it. And so it might be worth I mean, are you guys creating like a standalone for like PC, or are you thinking about app?
It would just be PC. It's pulling from app ideology.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
It feels to me like a real-time strategy augmentation, and you would call it an app.
Yeah.
So, and you guys pointed out a few of those, but like, have you tried like the Final Fantasy 15 one has mechanics like that? Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Final Fantasy War of the Lions does that in some capacity, and it messes around with the idea of real time versus I need to wait. So like it might, those games might give you guys some interesting ideas, because they've been experimenting with that stuff for a long time. So.
So same vein, but taking it back a step, when you're comparing what you're shooting for to Fallout, you said, but we're going for a different platform and target audience. And then you gave us reasons why what you're doing is getting out of your players. Who are your players and what is your platform?
Right.
Platform's PC.
Platform is PC. Our players are people who do enjoy like the idea of construction management, but also RTS, but with a more sense of permanence. Because what happens with RTS games generally is you play around or you play an hour and then you get off and then you restart the next time that you come in. The idea is combining it with the construction management of like those mobile games or something else where you can continue to build up your settlement and continue to play through and loop through these things. Ideally, if we had unlimited time and resources to work on it, it would be procedurally generated and then working through and continuing basically until you're either fully upgraded or fully explored.
Yeah, I think I have a couple of points to kind of tag on to other people. One, I think right now for your pitch, your game is not well enough to find, right? I think like I can see a lot of elements that you're pulling in, but I still don't think I have like a cohesive picture of what exactly each phase does and how they relate to each other, right? Also, the concern Baker brought up of just like at least two of your phases, like the building and the combat phase, each sound like separate games, right? It sounds like the combat phase is a game like an RTS, right? Like StarCraft, like Age of Empires. And then your building phase sounds like you're talking about a game like Anno or Tropico or something like that, right? And I could see how those could work, right? But those games are very different where the RTS versions are very much focused on not only are you managing your troops, but you're also managing your buildings and everything at once, as we've talked about. And then you have a game which is more just like a city builder, right? Like a resource management city builder. And so I could see how you could marry those. I don't know how you plan to do that, and I don't know if you can do it in the amount of time you have, right? Sure. Then the extra phase, the exploration phase, just seems like a map system to me. So it doesn't seem like a full phase, right? So that's fine. I'm not worried about that. So yeah, I think you need to kind of refine your pitch a little bit more and make it clear what you're making. And also I think you need to do a wider, like basically a lit review of everything that you're, like you've talked about Fallout Shelter and stuff. There's been talk of various RTS, but I think you need to look into games like Anno, games like the ones that Nick was bringing up earlier, like just yes, exactly. It's just like a wider range, right? Because you can't figure out what you're making unless you know what you can compare it to. And so if you can't list like, here's 4 games that are very similar to ours, but with these differences, then it's hard for us to visualize what you're making. And so I think everyone's just going to say, this looks like an overscoped, mess. So yeah.
I don't know if I put it that way.
Dang.
I would have been much more harsh.
So, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing. The other thing that bothers me is that you're doing a pirate game, but there's no open sea battle. I mean, like just take the word pirate off of it because it literally is not a pirate game unless there's open sea battle. I mean, I just feel like this is colonization. There's no doubt this is colonization, right? But it's as far as it being pirates, I mean, when you guys told me pirates, I was waiting for the open sea battle and it just never happened. You know what I mean? Pirates are pirates.
Like
Sid Meier's
Vikings.
Pirates.
More like Vikings, than pirates.
Like they have like a
I
city.
mean, I feel like if you're gonna make a pirate game, like literally the entire game should be open sea battle.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I wouldn't make it pirate, actually make it pirate themed, but make it a romance simulator and tie it to our Viking instead. Then you got something special.
I had one other thing. Oh, Ben.
Well, I just wanted to bring it up too, because I know like we talked a little bit more outside of this about it. And one of the sort of games that I kept bringing up that sort of dances around what you're trying to do, I think is a good example is XCOM, where you have that base building aspect of it, but you have to wait for stuff to finish and you go out and do missions while that's happening, you gather resources and come back. Right. And yes, those are 2 different experiences, but they tie together. So trying to figure out how are you going to do all that is going to be an interesting problem to solve.
To go off that too, right? I think like based on what you were talking about, where you're not trying to make an RTS, right? I think XCOM is a great example because it's not, it's a tactics game, right? So things are not happening in real time. So I can be like, oh, I need to figure out what I'm going to do, walk away from my computer for 5 minutes, come back and do it. So I think that's another, games like XCOM, like any kind of tactics game would probably solve.
Throwing my laptop across the room.
Well, the thing about XCOM too.
Did you have a 95% chance to hit? All of the aliens die if your laptop.
That's true, yeah.
That's the best way to beat a game.
Reality.
One other thing to bring up, this is not related to the scope or anything or the idea. For your external team, what assurance do you have that they will do work?
I've worked with them before, I guess, so I understand.
Are they students?
Yeah.
What happens when they have a project that they have to do at the end of the semester?
That's why we have so many of them.
Are they all students?
Yes.
They will all have projects at the end of the semester. So have contingency plan.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Honestly, I think with what you're doing, you could stub a lot of it out just with primitive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not even worry about graphics. I mean, just start with that and then replace graphics as they come in. I think that, my big thing is I think it's way out of scope and I think you need to like really talk about what it is you want to do, like what it is you guys are really into. Like if you talk, when you're thinking about this game, what is the thing you're really looking forward to working? I'm asking a question. I'm literally asking.
I'm gonna tell them to answer you later though, because we're
Oh,
over time.
my bad.
So, and now we clap.
I think like other based on.
I was thinking like, I had like, yeah, I forgot.
You know, I think there's a good core.
Hey, hello, everyone. Hey, how you doing, guys?
Terrible, I can't talk.
We are Team Deadbolt. We are presenting our game project, Cog and Key.
Click on the slide.
Awesome, great, thank
The
you.
mouse wasn't.
There we go. All right. So Cog and Key is a 2D action platformer placed in a dystopian world where machinery is essentially deemed humanity as a whole unnecessary. Throughout the game, the player will utilize melee and ranged combat, maneuver through environment, as well as utilize keys to both manipulate the environment and the enemies within it. Ultimately, the player will play as Judith Throttle, who seeks to free humanity from the automaton scourge. Remember, you are the key.
Alright, so the core mechanic of our game is speed manipulation. So the player character has 3 different winding keys, and since this entire world is built out of clockwork machinery, these keys can be inserted into pretty much anything to modify how they move. And so each key has a different effect when it's plugged into something. One of them speeds things up, one of them locks them in place, and then the last one puts them in reverse. And so this mechanic will have an impact on both of our 4 pillars of our game, which are platforming and combat. So for platforming, you can modify the platforms, how they move, to make it easier to navigate to the end of the level. And with combat, if you use the right key on an enemy, it might give you an advantage in your battle. So here are our reference games for this. For Hollow Knight, we think it has a really good balance of platforming and combat. And so since those are the 2 pillars of our game, we're looking to achieve a similar balance. The 2 most recent Legend of Zelda games have time manipulation mechanics that will work kind of similarly to our core mechanic. And then lastly, we think Shovel Knight has a really strong 2D platforming level design that kind of uses elements in the environment as the focus of the levels.
So while our entire game is mainly focused on the aesthetics of Studio Ghibli, for our aesthetics, we split it into 2 different types. We have the humanity, who has been pushed to the wildlife area of the Studio Ghibli films, so very naturey, kind of whimsical. And if we go to the next slide, we have the steampunk side of our game, which is still going to be very inspired by Studio Ghibli's Castle in the Sky movie, for example, and the Howl's Moving Castle, so that big robot they have. So we have also the Guardians from the 2 new Legend of Zelda games, Tick-Tock Clock from Mario Kart, and we also have the entire world of Ratchet and Clank ripped apart, so all the mechanical components of that, and we love the It Takes Two Cuckoo Clock level with how whimsical and crazy it looks despite it being a clock. We have 3 artists, all 3 of them are 2D artists, and we have 2 of them who have a focus in 3D. We have our main character, Judith here. She is has a robotic arm that can store and change the mechanical keys that are inputted into all of our combat and platforms. And we also have our final boss, which is going to be a clockwork mechanical spider. We have one of our artists here. They did 8 concepts, and we're currently leaning towards number 3 and number 7. With the number 7 not having a face to make it more mechanical-like and non-emotional, but also the gears of number 3.
Okay, so for our scope, we're looking for a strong mechanical and aesthetic tie. At least 2 of the 3 key types we want to implement, and those would be more directed towards what the play tests and satisfaction levels are from our play testers. So if we think fast and lock work best, we'll go with those, or vice versa. We're looking to get 1 polished level with ramping difficulty, so that means about a 10-minute vertical slice, about 3 polished common enemies and 1 polished boss. So 3
random bugs and one polyp spider. The special platform types for dynamic gameplay, we want to have about 3 of those. And then we come to our challenges. So core mechanic is a little hard to implement, can be prone to bugs. So what we're thinking is have a good code structure, have good architecture, and make it easy to make changes. So instead of having a rigid, unchangeable, use variables instead, work around data small, hard to get details. Every mechanic in our game has to have 3 meaningful speed alterations, which is quite difficult when you think about it. So playtest often and determine which iteration works well. If we think that it needs to be tweaked a little bit, those playtests will allow us to make those fine detail tunings. The artists are external and they work on their own schedules, can be a bit of a problem, but if we maintain good communication practices and enforce deadlines, we can work around that. Further along that line, none of them are currently in college, I believe, as all good for all 3 of them, so they don't have to have projects, they won't be stuck at the end of the semester with those kinds of problems. And like all things, life can throw challenges. Core team and the external have their own lives to live, and we might have things that have to be pushed. So having the members be diversified in their talents can help cover where need be. So that brings us to the team and their formations. So first we have Alexa. She is our technical artist and UI UX designer. She'll be working as a backup programmer and artist if anybody on the external team has to have fill and we don't have really cover. There's Ethan, right here, our gameplay programmer and a backup level designer, should I find myself indisposed. I'm Liam, I'll be the producer, level designer, and narrative lead. And we have Luna, our AF programmer and backup programmer. Don't forget, you are the key. What are your questions? That's what you're up first.
Where's Oz?
Who?
Oz is missing. Oz. TikTok.
Oh.
That's how young we are.
You have a slow burn, you can't do this.
I just realized the camera's pointing out.
If you've never seen it, make sure you have a fever or are somehow inebriated and watch the other Oz movie.
The Return to Oz with that one guy who was the Spider-Man?
Yeah, and one woman that was in the crash, yes.
Okay, I'll be sure to get White prepared for such a.
Yes.
And
I hope you like nightmares, because you'll have them.
Oh, I love them. He's motivated.
You have a hand in check.
Sean, let's go.
Hey guys.
I can hear you. I was about to shut your voice off.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think that the aesthetic choice is really cool. And I really like how you have kind of figured out what those elements from the Ghibli aesthetics are that you're going for. And I think the scope also sounds pretty good so far. The one thing that I'm not super clear on is, and if you mentioned this, I was taking notes and missed it somehow. What is the perspective of the game?
It's third-person perspective.
So third person, like behind the character over the shoulder type thing?
It's a
or-
2D platformer.
So it's 2D platformer.
Side scroll.
To better answer that question, it is 2D. We're trying to blend in the characters to have 3D models. They don't have to worry about having to change every single keyframe if we have a misstep in the animation line. So using 3D elements in a 2D plane.
Okay, and you said that your artist is 2D. So how are you going to make that transition from 2D art to 3D?
So I can answer that. So we have 3 artists. All 3 of them are well versed in 2D, and 2 of them are well versed in 3D. So we have one person focused mainly on like backgrounds, some foliage, some of the enemies, and then we have our 3D people. One of them is designing the model and doing the rigging and weight painting, and the other person is doing all the animations. I'm also doing the implementation as the tech artist, so taking those animations and making sure they work with the 2D art as well as the level itself.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. I personally like Spider number 5.
Oh, whoops.
You usually can't see them real well in here because of the.
Yeah.
Can I crack the lights real quick?
Yeah.
Spider number 5.
Yeah, that's all. I think you're off to a good start. I think it's looking good. You've put some thought into it, which is always good.
Much obliged.
Thank you, Sean.
Yep.
So I have 2 questions. One, why isn't braid one of your references?
We talked about that.
And then another one that I would add for a really cool reference is the bridge. I think is another 2D platformer where you're trying to like puzzle and get around that I would look at. Because I think to me, like I want to know, like I can see 2D moving around, things stopping, pausing, but having to either combat or avoid enemies to then putting the key to then have that do something. Like I'm struggling seeing how as a player I'm doing puzzling and combating in your 2D like because you only have so much space in 2D world. So I'm just struggling in seeing that, and I would want like to know more about that either here or another time.
Okay.
So puzzling isn't currently one of our target pillars. We are aware that our mechanic might end up leading us in that direction, but we didn't want to aim for platforming, combat, and puzzling all together because that seems like too much.
But
So
It's included, but it's not core.
so then I guess like as a player, why do I have the ability to change time?
So to answer that, I believe we referenced Tears of the Kingdom because we're not aiming to change time directly, we're aiming to change momentum.
Like the direction of a moving thing, which most likely means that there is an ideal position, some sort of puzzle to manipulate
Yes.
the
I see what you
enemies.
mean.
yeah, it's very well made.
So although you don't want to make a puzzle game, you are.
We're open to all considerations. It's very much a kill your darling thing.
Okay. So yeah, I think braid and the bridge.
We haven't forgotten about braid. We don't know how to work that.
Yeah.
I don't guys anymore. Sorry. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Non.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, what is the Russian and Black fan in the team?
We don't be a fan of a reference.
Okay, I will mention this as a recommendation from that franchise. Yes, in terms of aesthetics, definitely follow that. I think it benefits with your key structure. And one of the, I would say, signature moves about that franchise is that the main character, Ratchet, uses his wrench essentially both in combat and puzzle solving. And I would recommend you guys check on that because I think you could really use your keys as a multifunctional tool, just like his wrench.
You must have a keyblade.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We've been trying to
without
avoid
any
such a thing.
copyright infringement, but yeah.
It's impossible with this thing, you know that.
More sorts.
I saw Sam's hand and then I saw Miles. So Sam then Miles.
Ryan, Sam?
So listen, I was looking at Sam. I'm so sorry, Ryan. Punch me later.
I will.
Thank you.
So I noticed like what I really liked about your team presentation slide is that you had contingency plans for each other. You had artists filling in for artists, you had developers filling in for developers. But one thing I'm worried about is producers.
Yes.
What happens if your producer goes down?
Well, I'm always active on Discord, so it's something about me that I try to do less of, but in this case, we need more of. I never stop checking Discord. I'll even answer calls at 1 a.m, even if I'm asleep. So I can be sick and out of position, or as long as I have a device near me, I will be able to answer things. So if I were to go out of commission, I'll have things set up before I go out of commission.
To answer it in a more serious and less sarcastic, less jokey tone, we all feel self-driven by our own motivations. And if the inevitable metaphorical truck happens, we will clearly communicate and find our needs within the rest of our team. And especially Alexa is working as a technical artist and artist coordinator. So if she needs to, she can, and I think Ethan and I can also step in if it's brief for Liam as well, so.
I would say the metaphorical truck isn't an if, it's when.
Yeah.
It's always a when. That's something I do like about the team format so far is that because of our self-driven aptitude that should one of us fall flat, it's that we are able to pick up the slack pretty reliably so far. So
Can you just take me through an example of combat? Like a very clear example of what you're talking about with combat, because, and I'll tell you why. What you talk about with Tears of the Kingdom and Legend of Zelda, they use that for puzzling. And the reason it's so good for puzzling and not so good for combat is because combat is more real time. And you don't have a lot of time to think about how you're going to use these things. So I really want to hear how you anticipate using keys during combat when you're actually fighting.
We honestly haven't discussed that yet.
There was something
Wow,
we did have.
I mean, is that not the core of your game? Hold on, wait a minute. Hold on.
Back. Then I said nothing.
It's okay. What we have discussed, we have not finalized anything, but we have a good concept of what we want to do. So at the moment, the key use would be, think of dry bones in Mario. So if you were to disable a automaton in that moment, you could then instruct it to do something. We could have a set path. So say we wanted to implement it into puzzling or movement, you can't jump up to a high enough platform. You could then instruct it, I want you to go this way, and then you have a block step on and go up. But
That's great, except it's not combat.
Yeah, well, combat would be destroying it and then using it, but that's the current hurdle.
Is that a time manipulation mechanic at that point, or are you programming a robot?
So it isn't inherently time manipulation as much as it is using gear and machinery in the ways that they like in revolving forward and revolving backward, like reversing motion. Essentially, we are we're in a very loose design space right now where we wanted to sit on playtests and find out what players found the most satisfying about our gameplay and move from there, because we wanted to be combat focused and we obviously have the ability to pivot towards more puzzle focus.
Sure.
And our general kind of design principle has been just general like small dynamic platforms to kind of shut off certain level, which obviously puzzle. But having this enemy that essentially is like the dry bones, like you move the key, but you can also send it forward in the path and reverse it or something like that. We have a lot of design space in that.
Here's my problem though, is you have a lot of this design space to move in, and I don't hear any design filling that design space. So you're talking about how you're gonna go based on your play test, but what are they gonna be testing if you don't know what you're making? I mean, you're just gonna put out a bunch of random shit and then say, hey, which one do you like? Or do you have some real focus as to what this is gonna be? Because right now you're telling me about a puzzle game. Every time I ask you a question, you tell me a puzzle game. You're not telling me combat. Cut bait, go to a puzzle game, forget about the combat. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, I mean, really, I mean, what is the point? All right. If you keep coming back to puzzle, then, you know, look at
Be a puzzle.
or give me a really solid combat and show me how you're using that combat. Because right now I like the aesthetic. I get the idea of working with mechanics versus working with time. That's why it's not as much like Braid as it seemed to be initially. But I don't get the combat at all. And that is your core thing. And to hear one of your teammates say, well, we haven't figured that out yet, even if you want to argue him down, he's not lying.
He ain't lying.
He ain't lying. You haven't figured it out. You keep talking about combat and time and keys. I don't see any of it.
I think there's a middle space that you could be, because if you think about like what's Dokio's mechanic, Mario 2, where you pick up a key in Mario 2 inside of a bottle, and then until you get that key to the keyhole, there's something attacking you. So rather than having combat and puzzle, the tension of solving the puzzle has creatures attacking you as you're picking up these keys.
Especially with the idea of dry bonings, for example, if you hit an enemy that has a key already in them, and you can put your key in them to control them instead, you could use that enemy to then further a puzzle or further be able to progress
Especially
with
if you
things
have
that are attacked.
like different keys, right? So like if you have, say, I don't know, a green key, now this thing is my friend, or a red key, this thing is going to start attacking other things that are nearby. Like there's a lot of potential in there. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you.
I think that's the big thing, right? And it's kind of what Sven was saying is like, I think there is a lot of potential there. Like I can see combat where there's like, oh, there's a whole bunch of environmental elements, and I'm fighting like this, you know, like spider boss that you have, and I can like, oh, there's like this big piston that comes out of the wall, and I can use my key and have it like slam the enemy back or something, right? But I think right now, what you have is so vague that nobody can really picture what you're trying to make. And so I think people want to be able to picture it so we can give you input on it, but we can't do that, right? Like if you keep it so vague to see what people want, people aren't gonna be able to tell you what they want because they're just gonna describe vastly different games.
All right. And now we clap.
I want the keynote to flat now.
Queen comes up and goes, and now we clap. I saw you took the hand up in.
How you doing?
But get cut off.
Full-time member.
Are you really? Wow.
Holy shit, there's Denmark.
Hey, did you pass around that thing with the cat ears?
Yeah.
Somebody got a hold of the cat ears picture of me and I'm not happy.
Oh, I know, I didn't pass it.
That's been my first couple.
I was there trying to. Hates trans people, and I hates witness, so I was like, needs a asshole, okay.
Have you played the look of somebody else?
Maybe the best weekend.
Indian War. So, Red Team Nimbus Score, and this is Thunderclap, a 3D third-person combat puzzle game centering around lightning. So, in Thunderclap, you play as Spark, this young protege of, am I covering both? Young protege of a brilliant inventor who wants to join this guild of lightning-wielding magicians. We definitely have an underdog vibe going because you're going up against something that's much larger than yourself. And to get into this guild, you need to go through a gauntlet that's designed for mages, but using the ingenuity and devices that you've created, you'll be able to hopefully get through the gauntlet and join the guild. So what do you get to do, right? The core mechanic follows a challenging lightning ability. You are able to discharge lightning similar to how clouds discharge lightning to the ground. And it'll always follow a specific behavior. And you have devices that can help you manipulate this behavior, and you need to manipulate it well enough to fulfill certain objectives. It is a combat game, but basically what's going to happen is the lightning follows a specific behavior, and learning how to use it in combat is the puzzle that you'll have to go through. So for this system, we've kind of created this basic pathfinding algorithm where lightning just goes to the nearest grounding point through the ideal path. It uses 3 foundational components that we'll use to help implement our designs and work things as we go, because we're going with like an open-ended approach where we want to see how players react to the system and then accordingly adjust our designs. Compare this mechanic to conventional lightning mechanics. I think it's hard to see because of the lights, but okay. Thank you. Compared to conventional lightning mechanics, it's often seen to be like a side mechanic where you just create this chain of points and the lightning just travels between each point. Ours is more focused on a deeper aspect of this. It's a similar mechanic, but it's a bit deeper in the way it works. Now on to silver for levels. Okay.
So by now we have a very basic game loop shown in the diagram. As you can see, the player starts with preliminary abilities. As he practices his abilities in dungeons, probably in combat or through puzzle solving, he would be more powerful and finally throughout the works through the dungeon and gain symbol of lightning, which is a kind of currency for character expansion. Then he can improve his ability using that currency or both maximum hit points. And again, he is ready for more challenging adventures in dungeons, and he can rerun the whole loop. So in terms of our narrative and the core loop, the game world came to us that the characters should go back and forth between cities and dungeons, just like many RPG does. Speaking of dungeons, our level design will only be as good as the gameplay we design it for. For example, in Breath of the Wild, the player is given options to beat the enemy while setting traps. You can say this is an electric trap. And rather than struggling with tricky combats. So driven by mechanics, we are considering scenario where the player is presented with a ton of enemies in a level, and it's hard to beat so many enemies. So in that case, taking advantage of the lightning propagation to deal AoE damage might be a good strategy. And how to set the lightning path would be a kind of challenging puzzle. Also, we would place some enemies out of the player's attack range. So the player has to work around the environment to see how he can deal remote damage. Currently, we are still sketching the layout and the block out for the game world and the dungeons. Afterwards, we will block out gray box to figure out how we can engage level design with gameplay to make the game fun. Emma?
All right, so here we have some information about the look and feel of our game. Our game will be played from a third-person perspective, and the player will be equipped with their steampunk-inspired gear, which they will use to manipulate the lightning. Our game will take place in training grounds inspired by European medieval castles, specifically castles in Ireland. And our enemies will be armored and mechanical, likely humanoid, also inspired by the steampunk aesthetic. So these are some mood boards we created to visualize the look and feel of our player, environment, and enemies. For our player, despite not being able to naturally wield lightning, we still want them to stand out as someone who can. For our environment, we want to convey that the player is entering a challenging test, but grand rewards await those who can best it. Though we may not get to include the surrounding scenery in our game due to scope, if we did, it would show the lush environment that the members of the guild are able to inhabit. And finally, for our enemies, the inspiration is wanting them to look robotic, but not too futuristic. This is why we are taking reference from games like Genshin and Zelda. We are currently in the concepting stage, finishing the concepts for our player, which can be seen here. And as we do this, we are onboarding our 3D external members, who we'll touch more on later, and getting them ready to begin work. Our strategy is to get a feel for everyone's specialties, set up an asset list, and delegate tasks from there. For any assets or animation we need that we are unable to make, we plan to look to the Unity Asset Store.
Now, moving on to our development approach and challenges with this project. We know the lightning mechanic we have, it's experimental. We know people are going to have different opinions about it. And that's why we want to drive our project with a playtest driven approach. We're going to allow players to give us feedback on what they like, what they don't like, and we're going to drive our design decisions from there. Now, another challenge we're going to run into is that we don't want the combat of the game to feel too challenging or too easy. Both of these challenges are going to be mitigated through continuous iteration and continuous playtesting as much as we can, and through the advice from faculty, other playtesters, and all of the above. Now, another big challenge is that this is a 3D game. We need lots of assets. This includes characters, enemies, environments, props. But to help us with this, we have a team of external artists who are students, but we do have plans in place to not allow that to get behind us, and Emma is going to be in charge of keeping them in check.
So now that we've discussed what our game is, we can dive more into specifically what we plan to achieve with our project. So first, we'd like to create a tutorial level and 3 small campaign levels to gradually introduce the players to all of the mechanics of our game. And to kind of get an idea of the size of the levels we're thinking of, imagine something like Portal, where you have a very contained level that's dedicated to typically 1 or 2 things. We also have a few 3D models that we'll need for the game. We'll, at a minimum, with the help of our external art team, have a player model, an enemy model, and some models for our levels and props to bring them to life. And finally, we'd like to give our players some bite-sized chunks of our narrative for the game, but we want to have a much larger focus on the gameplay itself. And now, a welcome to our team.
Hello, I'm Silver, the level designer of our group. I primarily focus on drafting layout, blackout, and shaping player behavior.
I'm John. I'll be the AI programmer for the team, and I'll also be working on developing some unit tests for testing and iterating on our mechanics.
I'm Siddharth. I'm primarily on the design of the game. I'm also going to be prototyping certain mechanics that I design, and I'm also working on the narrative.
Hi, I'm Mike. I will be doing the underlying gameplay systems development and making everything connect.
Hi, I'm Emma. I am working on the aesthetics and production of our game, as well as the concept art. And speaking of art, this is our 3D art team. We currently have 5 external 3D artists working with us. 3 of them specialize in characters and organics, and 2 of them specialize in environment, hard surface modeling, and props. Thank you.
You can like back on it. I'm gonna start with it. It irrationally bothers me that the list of names is in a different order than you are sitting in chairs in the photo. I get that it's irrational, but it irks me.
Not gonna lie.
I know, I saw you taking it.
Oh.
Did I catch that there are gonna be ability upgrades for the lightning as part of the core loop?
Yeah,
You said that?
that's definitely a stretch goal though. So
Okay, well, stretch goal or not, what's that? How do you up, like? I don't get how that works.
yeah,
Like either I can start lightning or I can't.
no, so there's 2 core devices to the gameplay. One is something that's capable of absorbing or attracting a lightning bolt from the clouds and providing you with the energy you need. And the other is a set of throwable devices, which when they land on a surface, they latch onto that surface and they act as sort of like a conductor rod. And basically what you're doing is you're pathing the lightning. So what we thought about for progression is that if time permits, we could have upgrades to those throwable devices where it could do some interesting things. Like there could be like a repeater one where if it gets struck by 2 lightning bolts, it shoots its own lightning bolt after a delay. Or something that's capable of splitting the electric arc to go to multiple grounding points. So just, stuff like that, getting creative with it.
Okay, so that gets into my other question is, I'm kind of like the last one, like what actually does combat look like? Is it, I have to look at an environment and figure out what the path would be and start the chain of lightning? Or am I setting all the points along the way? And then is that fast? Is it slow? Am I working off instinct? Is it more puzzle? I have no idea how that's gonna feel.
Right, so in terms of the combat, the enemies right now, we have like a very basic setup for them. So the common enemy will probably be just like the sort of automaton that chases you around and tries to swing a sword at you or something like that. If not a sword, a spear. Yeah.
I don't care. It's moving, that was more the question. Yeah.
So there will be like a simple dodge mechanic and stuff, but the only way to progress through the level is to set up a path that's going to get through certain level obstacles. We do see enemies as also potentially being obstacles based on our design. It is a bit hard to like explain, especially without visual representation.
Am I killing things? I mean, a
Yeah.
gauntlet is typically I have to make it from point A to point B. Am I just trying to survive or do I have to kill the things? And if I have to kill the things, how?
You do have to do things and you're able to basically clap your hands together to send out a lightning bolt. But the lightning bolt will only follow its own, like a path that it would normally behave and.
But I can
design follow.
control that path via things I've done.
Using throwable devices, if you understand the level and the way it works, you can kind of get.
But if things are moving, the path is changing and it might work or it might not.
Exactly, so you gotta, that's.
Rapidly getting more complicated. 3 campaigns is too much.
Yep.
It just is. It's not a conversation. And your scope, you didn't have anything about number of ability or the progression or that kind of thing. So just make sure you clarify that. Those were my big things.
Sean's online.
Yeah, and Sean's got his hand.
Hi. We can get Sean first on Zoom.
Okay, yeah.
Escape.
Yeah, it's your turn.
Sure.
I mean.
Okay, yeah, can you talk, Sean? Can we hear you?
Sure.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So yeah, I think that scope wise and kind of how that lightning thing was working was kind of going to be part of my question. But my other question is, John, since you're working on this, are you planning on it having an absolutely punishing difficulty curve?
Hopefully not terrible.
I also heard nothing about AI.
Yeah.
Is there AI?
Yeah, so we have a currently it's a relatively simple AI. We plan to just have one as our minimum viable thing, which will just kind of walk around and like this, kind of chase you and try to attack you. But that'll be pretty much the extent of it.
I don't want to give it up from Sean.
But yeah, I don't plan to make my AI particularly just unbelievably difficult this time around.
This time around, I'll believe it when I see it.
So I had a question about progression in more of the thematic sense. If you're pushing this whole narrative of like science versus magic and oh, you're not a mage at all, how are you going to progress with your mechanic stuff using rewards from the mages that's supposed to be magical?
Right, so we were discussing this and we don't think it's going to be magical. So Bloodborne, for example, has this system Insight, which is like a currency, a sort of currency that you gain. Every time you see a higher being, you kind of gain more insight, and having more insight allows you to see more in the world. So what we were thinking is we could have a similar thing where as you go through levels, your character understands more about the lightning that they're manipulating and is able to then augment their devices to take into account this new thing that they've learned. So that's kind of what we were going for. I think the wording was a bit confusing, but we're still in the discussion phase for sure, with a lot of our design elements, especially.
So there's no magic.
You don't get to do any magic, but the gauntlet itself, since it's designed by mages, it could have some magic in it.
Are the mechanical monsters designed by mages?
Sort of, but basically magic will be used to give them like a relative scale of freedom as compared to you, you're not going to have as much freedom with the lightning as they do.
So they're using magical lightning.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, got it.
And you're using actual.
I agree with Erica. You should cut it in half right now.
Yeah.
Before you even finish this conversation, you should cut it in half.
I keep coming back to. I'm trying to think of how to best say it. So. Freezing right now.
You sure?
I'm trying to think about. All right, so let's just go with this. Techno mages in Babylon 5. Go watch Babylon 5, which everyone should watch that anyway. But they basically use technology because technology, if we have never been exposed to it, seems like magic, right? So there's a potential for you to flatten that. Instead of it being magic versus science or whatever, it could just be science and here you go. Science, steampunk. Does steampunk and lightning really go hand in hand?
Yeah, it's electricity. Yeah, sure.
Okay. I guess I didn't see Tesla anywhere, so I was confused. But
electrofunk.
Yeah, there we go. And so basically there's so much going on there. The game feels like it should be a crafting game more than anything else. If I'm an inventor, if I am doing any of this stuff, I should be able to put together random craft and then just stick it somewhere to see if it does what I think it's going to do. And like, because when you get down to it, if you're talking about like inventors or like people who are fiddly, the age group thing is going to start factoring in. Because like when I think of inventors, I think of like Data from the Goonies or the dad Gremlins, and you guys are like, what? What are any of those? And so, you might run into some problems just with like generational issues about like who they're thinking is going to be in this game and what they're actually seeing.
Right. Yeah, to address the age group thing, we did think the protagonist is like the protege of like a much older inventor.
Yeah.
I think since we've minimalized the narrative, there's actually a much larger narrative. And with that in mind, certain elements will make more sense.
Yeah.
It just comes down to how we're going to deliver it within the game, I think.
By cutting it in
half.
half.
Yep.
Actually,
Yeah.
probably important.
I gotta excuse myself. I got class. Good stuff though. I like it. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll win.
So directly off of what Nick just said, like it just dawned on me, like you're playing a game where the setting is you're an inventor, and not once you talk about like I'm crafting stuff. Like once Nick said that, like don't make me a game that's I'm an inventor or been trained by an inventor and I can't create something. Like being able to throw things or like just upgrade. Like why am I an inventor? Like I should be able to craft. I think like Sten said like the redstone in Minecraft. Like let me craft the items that I'm actually going. And then the upgrade loop is like, now you've learned new ways to craft things. You can learn new tools to build something and then go use those things that you've invented in the gauntlet. Right. If that's not your game, then like I'll be upset.
When Silver was talking, my mind went to, I want to be the one to make the gauntlet and stop the minions.
Sure.
Well, just along those lines, and to talk about something more recent inventory than Goonies, even though Goonies is amazing, right?
The actor just came back. Yeah, right.
My initial thought hearing this was something more along the lines like Legend of Korra, where you have like Asami, where I don't have any bending abilities, but instead I have this giant glove that I can shock people with, right? I have a car that I can drive around. I have all of these different things that I had to figure out how to do this without all those resources, right? In that sort of feeling versus just.
I was just thinking of Wheel of Time, like before the world breaks, they have like canned flows that can just flow anywhere. So there's so many ways to do that, and it in and of itself is a scoping issue, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, what you mentioned is kind of the vibe we were going for, is that, again, it comes down to the narrative and the motivations of the character and why they're going through this conflict. The actual reason behind it is, it's a more emotional thing, but since for scoping issues, we want to just not delve into that. And of course, that creates this whole challenge. And what you said about adjusting the inventions yourself, that was something that I was considering initially. But then again, it was all scope related. Like I was really worried about.
So prioritize, like if
Even ignoring, you had unlimited time and unlimited resources and you could do all the things you wanted to do. You'd still have to answer the question of what is the first mechanic that's introduced and how does it convey that big narrative?
Right.
So that, and you've got to be able to do that without the player knowing the 5-hour backstory.
Right. Yeah, I think the important thing is, right, like, your goal is to make a vertical slice, you mentioned that, right? Which means there needs to be a whole thing, right? So I don't think anyone's gonna be upset with you if you say like, this is how we would do a crafting system, or this is how we do it. We're not, we might not get to it, right? We're like, but this is where we're going, right? Same thing with a narrative. You don't need to write the whole narrative out, but have like an idea of what is going to guide you. And then say, and then for time, we're gonna do this.
But even if you implemented the whole progression system, it's gonna take what, 10 minutes, an hour for the player to get that far along?
Right.
They've got to be engaged and get it in the first 30 seconds with the bare bones intro mechanic anyway.
Right.
So if that can't convey the vibe you're going for, it doesn't matter if the rest can or not.
Right. I mean, you can kind of work around it, right? Like if it's something as simple as like a muggle walks into Hogwarts. Right.
Well, exactly. They can convey, you can work
And so
around it, but
then
you have to know what it is
have-
without saying, oh, but it's in the
and
backstory.
inventions that will help you get across your thing.
Right,
That
we need to let
can
the-
first couple of you-
well, yeah, like
Use.
yeah, we should go.
All
Why
butterflies
am I
without
typing
leaving,
more?
but-
It's because you've got.
Which one are you? Are you this?
We are.
There's no name.
Probably ours, like.
Cause she's sexy, she's saying she can't find her.
They were like literally just hanging. It looks like ours.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Like,
Yeah.
pretty sure. What are you gonna do when he says the name?
So, running it by you guys if you have any chance. I think you have to.
Yeah, right there. I'll just
But you're all right next to each other.
Think about it. One dude like.
I don't have any. All right, let's, eyes up front.
Welcome everyone to our pitch. We are Guild Noctua, and this is our game, Eternal Machination. Eternal Machination is a third-person 3D dark action fantasy game where you are Seed, an avatar of chaos and shadows that has been sealed away for a very long time to save humanity. However, with the Archons now needing your help to defeat the humans you were supposed to destroy from the beginning, you have now been freed temporarily to help them. But to get your actual full freedom, you have to do what the Archons say and make humanity go extinct. And so to prevent eternal damnation, you must face eternal machination. let's talk about our inspired games and mood board. We want to have a dark aesthetic that is still very vibrant in colors. And in terms of our inspired games, we have been looking into Shadow of War and God of War, where we have a combat system that is very fluid in its looks and feels. It's not really a button masher, but more of a really cool looking game in terms of its combats. And in terms of our concept, we have our main character, Seed. Seed is this immaterial being made completely out of shadows, pronouns they, them, where they don't really have a gender or a species to begin with. They have been created to destroy humanity, and that is all they know. But through the game, you will figure out what it means to be this creature yourself. And the person that will be helping you is Arcolia. Arcolia is the last of the Archons and the main leader. She is the one who has imprisoned you to begin with, and the one who has now freed you. She will be our main narrator, guiding you through the objectives and the story with each step along the way.
So as far as our environmental design comes along, we plan to include 3 areas if all of our scope permits. What we have for our design, for our first most design, we wanted to focus on our onboarding area, the holy sanctums in which the Archons used to reside. We focus primarily on these sort of Gothic Mount Olympus statues that aren't necessarily of Greek culture, but represent that sort of Gothic olden look. We have our main concept right here, which is the scale of the design of the settings at large. The sanctum, of course, where the player would be starting and onboarded into this swampy Badlands area where the player would first encounter enemies in combat, and if time permits for our final area, the human-made factories where the game would culminate in its ending. These are a further continuation of the sanctum. We really wanted to nail down the look of the onboarding section primarily first of all, because that is where we will start our development. We wanted to focus on these floating islands in the sky in which these godlike figures resided. As the players progress, they go from island to island connected by bridges, slowly descending down to the floor below. What these islands will do is they'll onboard these players in these separate sections. So we wanted a contained section for each one to highlight the mechanics of the game, bringing in the environmental design not only as a setting piece, but also something to further the player's onboarding system. As far as the actual combat itself goes, we are focusing primarily on using your shadowy essence to boost your combat ability and really focus on what makes our game look good, feel good, and sticks out. Shadows, darkness, it's sexy. And we want to nail that down right on the head. We want combat to feel fluid. We want your attacks to go into each other, flow into each other, and make sense when they do. We're not looking for grand combat shows like Devil May Cry. We're looking for something like God of War. Attacks should flow, and attacks should make sense.
So now that you've heard a bit about the game, let's talk about how we're going to get there. So for our roadmap and our scope, we broke it up into 2 semesters that we're going to be working on this. So in the fall, our first and biggest goal is to have a fluid onboarding system where the player can be brought into the game, both mechanics-wise and ideally narrative-wise, to have a full understanding of who you are, what you're doing, and why you care. On top of this, we want to make sure that our combat passes a proof of concept because, like we said before, it's one of the biggest parts of our game. And if it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel fluid, it's going to completely ruin the experience. And so we're going to make sure to spend a lot of time on it. On top of this, we want to have basic enemy AI in just enough to provide variety so that, again, what's the point of having this really nice fluid combat system if you have nothing to really test it out on, especially something very rigid like the golems. On top of this, we want to have 2 well-designed environments, ideally the sanctum and the forest that you will enter shortly after. And then also we want to make sure we have our base aesthetics complete and hammered in. So if we do need to bring on extra animators or things like that, we can do so with a very tight and polished art Bible. And then looking towards the spring, we're going to want to have a culminating experience in a boss fight that'll feel really engaging and satisfying for the players. While also making sure that our combat is more polished and fleshed out and feels better than it did in the fall. To enhance that experience, making sure the narrative is also thrown in there and filled in and makes the experience, I would say, feel complete, as well as having that third environment that we talked about before, if time permits. So now that that's how we're going to get there, there are things that could get in our way. And one of the main ones that we want to acknowledge is that combat really needs to feel good and fluid. Because our whole game is trying to contrast that feeling of fluidity and rigidity, If our combat doesn't feel fluid and engaging, the game isn't going to hit as we want it to. On top of this, with a large team and then a pretty deep external team, having asset pipeline holdups can slow down where we want the game to be, especially the immersivity of the fluidity with the attacks if the animations don't really match up to how we want the mechanics to feel. That leads me to the next point where aesthetics can make or break the game. If one color choice is off, one animation doesn't feel exactly right with the slash, right? It'll completely make it. So that's one thing that we're really trying to pay attention to and really hone in on to make sure that there is no gaps. On top of this, we don't want to focus too much on our narrative and get into an analysis paralysis where we're not sure which direction to go. So we're really making sure to find a direction and really just go with it and then get reaction and feedback from our player base. On top of this, one of the other things that might get in our way is if our level design and our POIs don't stand out enough and give players enough direction through the game. And then outside of the game itself, we're all really passionate and we love to work on it. So dumping in a bunch of hours, we're trying not to burn ourselves out. So we're making sure and holding each other accountable. If we see people are tired or things like that, or stressed out, really take a step back and take a mental health day or things like that to really regroup yourself. And also scope, because like I said before, we're really, really passionate and we want to do a lot with it. So we're trying to constantly take a look and be like, oh, let's push that to a stretch. Once we get this and we'll talk about that. So yeah. So now let's talk about the founding members of the guild. So I'm Sam Beckman. I am the producer and I'm doing a lot of development, especially in regards to the combat and the character.
I'm Anuraj. I'm primarily doing level design, environmental storytelling, and VFX and some development.
I'm Ryan Cooper. My primary focus will be on AI. However, though, I also serve as a backup developer if any niches need to be filled.
Hi, I'm Boha. I'm concept artist and also responsible for taxonomy and.
Hey, I'm Jan. I'm specializing in concept design and narrative, but I'm also working on animations for my characters and edits.
So that's the internal team. Now we have our partners of the guild, or our external team. So we have 4 main people. We have Skylar Dittmar, who is working on our 3D environment, the environmental artist. We have Drew Janelle, who's our UI artist, making sure that the game looks and is able to be interpreted really well. We have Caleb Pendleton, who's going to be our composer for us and an audio specialist, because we want the game to really encapsulate the player and immerse them. Then we have Yaron Sun, who's doing UX design, because we want everything to flow. We don't want there to be any gaps, any bad UI or UX or menus. So then now let's talk about what we need, especially from from an advisor. There's 3 main parts. So from the art side, like we said before, the color choices are really going to matter because we want it to obviously have a dark color palette, but we want the colors to stand out and be visible. We don't want it to be hard to see. So having an advisor who's very well versed and knowledgeable of how to distinguish colors that flow really easily would be appreciated. Overall design choices with like animations, particle effects, and things like that. Having that understanding, it would be really helpful alongside with the feel of it to make sure that it's all, because for us, it'll make sense because we have the background knowledge of the project, but to someone who doesn't see it as often. And then from development, having someone who's comfortable with AI and optimization, because the game needs to be fluid, right? So if we have any hiccups, any frame lag, it's going to dump out and break the immersion and cause like anger. We've all played games where the frame just tanked right in a second, and it kind of be like, wow, what happened? And then obviously combat design and feel, because like I said before, it's really important and it needs to be something that's fattened and hammered in. And then from the narrative side, we want someone who's comfortable with the narrative and the ethics in narrative to make sure that we're not falling into any tropes or anything that might just make the game feel not as good for the players. Alongside with the world building and character design, so that we can have people that just aren't Gumbies, have people that actually kind of matter to the story so you can feel enriched, right? And so yeah, so going to the guild, we'll take questions now. Thank you.
Sorry.
Tiny comment, no, you have a serious game and a serious pitch, no memes. You have one, like in the beginning.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he's talking about it will kill.
Oh, no, that's because, okay, so with our game, with Doug Markida is a very famous martial artist who is very well known.
And show it without a text on it, it broke
Sorry.
the version of it, that's all,
Yeah.
I mean, minor comment, but I would.
Yeah.
It's
I
a
would-
meme.
He's a Rochester native, that could see.
Yeah.
Well, we were putting on it.
Anyway, it's not a conversation, a big conversation, go on to other questions.
Do any of you have a PlayStation 2?
Not with me.
So Mark of Cree, I think is easier to reference than God of War, because God of War has billions of systems on top of billions of systems. Mark of Cree is kind of the foundation. It was just a fluid combat game. That's literally all it was.
How do you spell
And
Cree?
KRI. There were two of them. You walked into a room, it would illuminate like, this guy is the triangle guy, this guy's the square guy, this guy's the circle guy, this guy's the X guy. And you would sit there and run into a room and you're like, okay, the circle and the square guy are next to each other. So you'd hit circle and square and he'd go after them. They also had sneak mechanics and things like that. But like, just as kind of if we're talking maybe like a primitive version of what God of War built on, it's gonna be that. And I think it's easier to replicate than God of War, so it may be useful for you.
For a while. Okay, yeah, I was wondering if any other faculty had any questions first, but could you go back to the like environmental design slide?
Yeah.
I was wondering about the building that you had on the the left. So the right's very much like Greek, you know, Mount Olympus, clouds, sky, etc. But the other one almost sort of looks more, it looks New Orleans. It looks like Spanish and French inspired. And I'm not sure, I can't really see a connection between the two environments.
So I did the drawing on the left, those sketches. And so specifically, what I was referencing was Rococo style architecture, specifically in the colors, but like I also wanted to take it and make it so as if like, you know, time has passed, these buildings have been abandoned. And so that's why I added those the foliage over it.
Yeah. I mean, why not just do like temples and
Well, to get to that point, we're not entirely just going for the Greco-Roman style of it, right? We're also looking towards, I don't know, if you're familiar with like the one features like the very small, like the French architecture in this point, where we don't want to just fall into that trope where it's like, oh, these gods and the gods live in temples and this, that, and that. So we're trying to branch it out and give them their own each unique flavor. So the buildings on the left are a more up-to-date direction of where we want them to go.
Okay. Yeah, I just say probably like to marry both of these concepts together, you know, a bit more gracefully. Yeah.
If I can jump in, on that, sorry, I'm gonna pull professor rank or online rank or something. The one on the right to me actually doesn't look Greek. It looks Greek revival to me. It looks like 18th century France. And that's sort of exactly what you're going for in the Rococo style. And I think it might be worth looking at more sources in 18th century 18th century architecture in general, which brings to the New Orleans style, right? A lot of that is 18th century or early 19th century Regency era style. And that's got a lot to work with, especially in since you have factories and things like that. It's the very early rise of factories, and it's a style that would fit well with a sort of steampunk we don't often see, a higher classic steampunk rather than 19th century grittier steampunk, if that's something you're going for. And of course you could have the degraded version of that higher classic steampunk as an aesthetic. It seems like you actually kind of have a through line there in my view, at least in what I'm seeing, that you could play off of. I'm wondering if you've got somebody on ethics, and I'm wondering if you mean, and I think you mean all these things, but if you mean narrative ethics, like what are the ethics of the narrative? What are we saying in this ethically, and also cultural appropriation and kind of representation of different peoples and representation of people in general, not just cultural appropriation, but how are we representing men? How are we representing women? How are we representing gender across the board, right? And how are we representing violence across the board? And how are we representing culture across the board? All those things seem really relevant. But I wanted to clarify, I guess, for myself, if that's what you meant by ethical focus in narrative, or if you mean something else.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the core idea of the ethics we want to maintain is that Seed, our player character, isn't really a hero. They're not even really a anti-hero. They're definitely not the villain either, but they're in this very niche space where they are so morally gray and focused on violence. We still want to make that a relatable character without actually giving them a look or story to relate to them. So that is the balance we want to maintain, which is why the ethics, specifically in narrative, is very important to us.
Especially with how we're also trying to translate that to the player, right? Like, we're not trying to go for those very gory styles of games, right? Like, we're fighting into mage punk golems. So we don't have to deal with that issue of, okay, is this really gory? Is this, you know, we're not trying to turn off player bases. Because that's an issue that we found in some games like this, like in the older God of Wars, it was super gory all the time. It just made people be like, oh, you know?
It'll make your German localization easier too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, Professor with a hand up.
I'll holler Joel. I don't mean to add on to the architecture stuff. If it's gonna be significant enough to cover in terms of your slide, you make sure you research the terminology. And like, cause you're like, I know not everyone's gonna have that as much as the artists are gonna be familiar with it. But if you're gonna use it as a part of the presentation to talk about it, like Gothic specifically was a very incorrect terminology used. And like, I've used incorrect terms all the time in presentations, learn later, of course. I don't mean to be like nitpicky, whatever, but like, it's a very good thing to frame in the environment. So pick up like the terminology, like Greek revival is a very good like building style. So yeah.
Thank you for that.
All right, we should probably wrap it up.
Thank you.
Really good. So
Thank you, Zoomland.
looking to the lean.